collaborating is simply to work jointly with. That's the first definition. There's something we're trying to get done, and to get it done, we need to work with others. But there's another definition, which is to work traitorously with the enemy. So when you say somebody's a collaborator, you mean they're betraying you or they're betraying their comrades by working with the enemy in contexts that have high complexity and or high conflict. In those circumstances, conventional collaboration doesn't work. There is another kind of collaboration which does work, and I call that other kind of collaboration stretch collaboration, the kind of collaboration that is necessary if you want to work together in contexts where we're not on the same team. We don't know before we start what's going to work.
Welcome to Change Leadership Conversations, where we dive into what it takes to lead change in today's disruptive and fast-paced world. I'm Yvonne Ruke Akpoveta, the founder of The Change Leadership. We curate change leadership workshops, content, courses, and community. I'm excited to bring you a very special episode today. I'm joined by Adam Kahane, a globally respected voice in systems transformation and author of several acclaimed books, including Solving Tough Problems, Power and Love, and Collaborating with the Enemy, which we'll be discussing today. Adam, welcome to Change Leadership Conversations. I'm hugely excited to be having you on Change Leadership Conversations today. I remember the first time reading your book, Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust. I was on the treadmill and having so many aha moments. I had to keep on pausing both the treadmill and the audio so that I could bookmark it. There were so many moments. And as someone who teaches, I kept referring to students to say, as a change leader, you have to grab that book. So to have you here is just hugely exciting. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was also exciting to hear that you're releasing the second edition. That meant I get two in one. I've read the first edition and I get the opportunity to read the second edition. Why I say I get the opportunity is because you call it more of a rewrite than an update or revised version. That's how you frame it when you talk about it. What inspired you to rewrite or revisit Collaborating with the Enemy?
A couple of things. The book came out in 2017, and so usually a book that would have been forgotten, but strangely enough, just a few months ago, it was in the top 500 of all books on Amazon, which is surprising to me. So I think there's something about the book, or at least the title, speaks to the time we're living in. And the way I summarize the book, or the title of the introduction, is Collaborating Across Differences Becoming Increasingly Necessary and Increasingly Difficult. I've never published a second edition of any of my books before. And when my publisher invited me to do it, I said I'd be happy to do it, but on the condition that I could change a lot. And partly, I guess you could say, an aesthetic consideration, that there were just things I was never happy with that just didn't seem quite right. So I decided I would approach it almost as a new book. And so I spent a year on it and talked to a lot of new people and ended up changing some things quite fundamentally. So I'm much happier with the second edition, and it's different in certain respects we can get into, and it includes exercises for every chapter, and it includes drawings by my granddaughter, and so in all, it's a big change.
And I see the smile when you say you're happy with this book. So tell me, who chose the title? Where did that title come from, Collaborating with the Enemy?
You know, titling is an art in itself, but if memory serves me right, that's the title I chose at the very beginning of writing the first edition, and it never changed. And as I say, there were things I wasn't quite happy with aesthetically in the first edition, so I never thought it was one of my better books, my best book, but I did think it was my best title. And at least in the first edition, it was a bit rhetorical. I referred to collaborating with the enemy, but I never really took seriously that idea of enemies. And
Okay.
one of the things that was happy to be able to do in the second edition is say, well, what does it mean, an enemy? And sometimes we do have enemies, people who are trying to injure or hurt us. So it's not purely a rhetorical matter. But the problem, if I can put it that way, is that this word enemy is now used quite loosely, or it's spread very thin. People who are trying to hurt or injure us, and people we don't like, and people we don't agree with, and people looked at us funny on the street. And that's dangerous. The
Yeah.
treating people who we differ from or who are different from us as if they are our enemies leads to terrible and violent results. And so I've managed to unpack that and, in a way, take the title seriously.
When you're introducing the book, you said collaborating with the enemy as even more fundamental, universal, crucial, and challenging than you did before. And you say it's important in every aspect of our lives and often a matter of life or death. Why do you say that? Life or death? It's even more important now.
Well, I think I'm saying a few things in what you quoted. One, when we label somebody as an enemy, in other words, as somebody who we think of as trying to hurt or injure us, then naturally we would try to defend ourselves and, in some cases, try to neutralize or eliminate them. So that's the life or death part of it. There's lots of situations, or not lots, there are situations these days where people attack their enemies or bomb them or bully them, and that has a logic of its own. The logic of, well, when you write a book, you're allowed to make up one word. So the word I made up was enemy-fy, the
Yes.
act of creating enemies. So that's the life and death part of it. But I think the more important point is that this phenomena of enemy-fying is something that we do in all spheres of our life. It's not just wars between countries, although there's a lot of that going around, but there is this cutting off, this ring, this vehement and sometimes violent opposition in community life, in work life, in family life, where somebody does something that I don't like or that I find threatening or upsetting. And often my first reaction, and now I'm speaking for myself, is to say they're bad. I've got to, well, either withdraw or defend myself or go into opposition mode. And I think that's normal and it's dangerous. And I guess the most important thing I'm saying in what you quoted is that pattern is happening more and more for lots of reasons in family life, in work life, in community life, and in international relations. And it's
Yes.
dangerous.
Yes, it is. And even in the workplace, especially when people feel I have something to protect because that's their job security, that's their bread and butter. So when they feel they have something to defend, it's easy to want to protect ourselves from who may be, in quote, an enemy at work who is trying to stall our progress. And another thing you mentioned, your first edition was 2017. As of the time of doing this interview, we're in 2025. There's a quote you put in there. You said when you first wrote the book, and quoting directly from the book, we're all now part of a pandemic of virulent, vicious, violent, ordering, polarizing, dehumanizing, demonizing, and enemy-fying. Like you said, you made up enemy-fying. How do you think the book addresses this new state in which we find ourselves when it talks about being faced with all of these things? Those are really strong words.
It's always hard to know, are things really different? Is that just the way people talk about them? I've thought about it carefully. I think it's true that we're facing this pandemic of enemy-fying, as I said in the section you just quoted. What the book offers is a way to understand that and a way to unwind it or escape from that dynamic. and a way to be more thoughtful about who is actually my enemy that I have to defend against or attack. That happens, although probably not as much as or as often as we imagine it's happening. How can we deal with people we differ from, people who are different from us, in a peaceful and productive way? And how can we work with people, as the title says, how can we live with and work with people who we may not agree with or like or trust? I don't think that's easy or straightforward or guaranteed, but I think it's possible. And I think it's worth trying. And the book offers both a practice and a theory for how to do that.
And I like that. I'm all into practice as well as theory. Theory is good in guiding. Practice, okay, what's a brass tacks? How can we do it? How can we get it done? It's usually key.
Yeah.
You facilitated collaboration in some of the most complex environments across governments, corporation, civil society, literally across the world. From that experience, practical experience now, not theory, how would you define the word collaboration?
I like writing, and one of the things I like about writing is looking things up in the dictionary. And the word collaboration or collaborating or collaborator has two different meanings in English, two opposite meanings. And this is also true in other languages, especially what I'm going to say is even stronger in French. So the first meaning of the word collaborating is simply to work jointly with. It's a synonym for cooperating, working with others. That's the first definition. There's something we're trying to get done, and to get it done, we need to work with others. But there's another definition, which is to work traitorously with the enemy. So when you say somebody's a collaborator, you mean they're betraying you, or they're betraying their comrades by working with the enemy. And I say strongest in France because the word collaborator, collabo, is understood immediately in French to refer to people who collaborated with the Nazis during the Nazi occupiers during the Second World War. This double meaning is important, that on the one hand, to work with different others is something we think we need to do to get where we're trying to go. And it contains within it the risk that doing so will cause us to betray that which is most important to us. And I think that tension, which is contained in the two dictionary definitions, is why collaboration is not straightforward. We think we need to work with those different others, and we worry that doing so will be a betrayal of our principles or our people or whatever.
Oh, I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit more. In the book, you talk about stretch collaboration. Can you unpack what that means and how it differs from what you also call conventional, or should I
Yeah,
say traditional collaboration?
this is the core idea in the book, and this is also an idea that I revisited and changed fundamentally in preparing the second edition. The starting point is that there's a conventional understanding of collaboration, which is that it's about putting the good of the whole, whether that's the team or the organization or the nation, putting that first. Let's prioritize the good of the whole. Let's agree on what the problem is, what the solution is, what the plan to implement the solution is, and let's agree on who's going to do what. And that's what I call conventional collaboration. And when I give talks and I ask people, do you think this is a good recipe? The three things I've just said, I did this even yesterday on a webinar. People mostly answer, yes, great recipe. This is how most people understand collaboration. In the first edition, I said this kind of collaboration is becoming obsolete. I think that was incorrect. I think actually it works very well, and it's the usual way of working together across difference, but it only works in very specific contexts. And the context that conventional collaboration works is contexts where complexity is low and conflict is low. where we can basically say, we're on the same team, let's just pull together and figure this out step by step, and everybody will do their job. And that's fine. And that describes lots of ordinary situations, whether it's work teams or orchestras or sports teams. But, and this is the major but, it doesn't work. That kind of collaboration does not and cannot work in contexts that have high complexity and or high conflict. In those circumstances, conventional collaboration doesn't work. There is another kind of collaboration which does work, and I call that other kind of collaboration stretch collaboration. The kind of collaboration that is necessary if you want to work together in contexts where we're not on the same team. We don't know before we start what's going to work. It's interesting. I launched the book in Banff, Alberta, at a global conference of divorce lawyers. This book has always had an enthusiastic following among divorce lawyers. I get emails from time to time, and this time the invitation came when the same week the new edition was coming out. So I accepted it. And I don't know that much about the field. There's a whole field called collaborative. They call themselves collaborative practitioner. These are lawyers and financial advisors and I guess therapists who work together with couples that are separating to try to do that productively rather than destructively. I don't know that much about the field, but that for me is an obvious example where the basic assumption of conventional collaboration, we're on the same team, the whole matters more than the parts, is no longer true. We've decided we're not on the same team, not at all. And yet we have certain things that we have to work out, whether it's marital assets or children or family relations. I think the reason they invited me is that they want to understand, how do we work together in such a context where stretching is required?
Yes, a lot of stretching. And when you talk about stretch collaboration, you talk about there are three dimensions there, where you say engaging with the collaborators, engaging with context was one of them, and engaging with ourselves was another one.
Yeah.
Kind of like the one about engaging with ourselves.
I'll come to that because I think in a way it's the most fundamental of the three. I use the word stretch to imply something that might be outside our comfort zone or normal range of movement, like physically stretching, that you're doing something that might be uncomfortable or even painful in order to be able to operate with a larger range of movement, and in this case, operate in contexts that have high complexity and or high conflict. And it's a stretch in that it involves doing pretty much the opposite of the conventional way in three dimensions. So the first is, I said 5 minutes ago that conventional collaboration, we put the good of the whole over the good of the parts that make up the larger whole. Whereas in stretch collaboration, we have to embrace conflict as well as connection. We have to acknowledge that there are real differences and disagreements and disharmonies and work with that and make it productive rather than saying, leave your own agendas, leave your differences at the door.
Yes.
If I just think about that example of a divorcing couple, it doesn't make any sense to say, leave your interests and agendas and differences at the door. I think that what's required to be what they call a collaborative professional in that context, say, no, we have to put these on the table. We have to grapple with them. There are real disagreements that can't be swept under the carpet, that have to be addressed explicitly. So that's the first stretch, is to embrace conflict as well as connection. And for people like me who don't like conflict, this really is a stretch. But I'm arguing it's required to deal with contexts of high conflict. Otherwise, you're just pretending it's not there, and I don't find that works very well. The second stretch is to experiment a way forward, which is that we can't know before we start. We may not agree on the problem, we may not know the solution, we can't really work out a plan. We just have to take it one step at a time and figure out what works and take the next step. This is quite familiar in some contexts, I guess you'd say in business contexts or scientific contexts, where we understand that we can't know what will work. We have to try it and learn as we go. And that's the whole notion of prototyping in business, in art, for that matter. But in many contexts, this is really unfamiliar. People want to know before they start
Yes, people like certainty.
yeah, well, I like certainty as well, but the fact that I want it doesn't mean I'm going to get it. And very often we just don't know what's going to work. We have an idea, we have a theory, and we have to try it and see and learn as we go. And the third one, which is the one you alluded to, in conventional collaboration, we basically give direction and follow direction. Everybody has their role, they do their role, they do what they're told, they tell other people what to do. And again, that can work in a team, but doesn't work at all with people who say, look, you're not the boss of me. I have things I need to do. And in that context, and this comes to, I think, what you were alluding to, how we work with ourselves, in that context, the only thing we can do, literally the only thing we can do, is decide what we ourselves are going to do. I have a friend, a man named Bill Torbert, a professor at Boston University, just passed away last week, so he's on my mind, a great organizational leadership.
Yeah.
And he said to me years ago, he said, Adam, you know that 1960s expression, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. He said, this is not the key point. The key point is, if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. In other words, if you can't see how what you're doing or not doing is contributing to things being the way they are, then it follows logically there's nothing you can do to change how things are except from the outside by force. And so the third stretch, which I consider to be the most fundamental, is stepping into the game, realizing I'm a player here. What I do affects what happens. What I do is the only thing I have any control over, literally. And so I'm going to focus on that. And for most of us, whose first reaction is what those other people ought to be doing, what those other people are doing wrong, what they ought to be doing. When I'm in a difficult situation or a dispute, that's, I would say, almost always my first reaction. And I may catch myself after a minute, or it may take me a year. But eventually, what I get to, and I consider this important, eventually what I get to is, okay, I may or may not like or agree with or enjoy what this other person is doing, but I really can't do anything about that. All I can do is, what am I going to do next? And that's the third stretch.
As you were speaking, I was reminded of John Maxwell, and he said something along the lines of, sometimes when you write a book, that's it. It's in print. It's out there. So if circumstances change, if things change, it's already in print. People who've read it, minds have been formed. So when you think of yourself now as writing the second edition, and like you said, some things may be obsolete, some things have changed, you've changed your perspective. Do you in any way worry that there's somebody out there with a perception that you don't quite agree with anymore, and they may even be quoting you on that? And meanwhile, you've evolved in a different direction.
Yeah. No, I don't worry about that at all. I consider it a privilege to be able to write and to be able to publish. And in this case, a privilege to be able to have a do-over. I'm much happier with the second edition than the first. I think I make more mistakes than the average person, but I'm also more ready to acknowledge my mistakes than the average person. So every one of my books, this is my, depending on how you count them, my sixth or seventh book, and they all start with, I used to think X, but I realize that's not true, so I've changed my mind. So my books are very explicitly about the theory I am extracting from practice, and I understand things differently than 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 30 years ago when I started doing this.
I love that. And it's the growth mindset, which is what I experienced reading your book. In one of the very first pages, you dedicate a whole page to saying, to my enemies, most of whom turned out to be my teachers. And you also talk about your experiences over the past decades have pushed me to understand differently than I did the basics of collaboration and the choices this presents. In the book, you continue to show that growth mindset and that there's always room for us to grow. There's always room for us to evolve. We may have thought about something in one way and we think about it now in a different way. And with my background as a change management, change leaders, we're often being asked to lead people through change. And it's easy to go into with the mindset, this is the way it should be done, or this is the theories that say it, or this is the frameworks, or this is the methodologies. So often the times we also have to learn to evolve and to grow through some of the things that it is that we're teaching, some of the things that is that we're saying, some of the things that we thought before and may change. When we think about collaboration and maybe even evolving or changing mindset and the new world of work in which we live in, what do you think is often misunderstood the most about collaboration or working with the enemy, in quotes?
I think there's a few things that are commonly misunderstood. I'll mention three of them. The first, for people like me that are enthusiastic about collaboration, I think it's easy to fall into the notion that we have to collaborate. It's the best option. And that's obviously not true. It's literally impossible to collaborate with everybody on everything. So
Mm,
collaborating is always a choice. And the way I explained it in the book is there's four options. We can force things be the way we want them to be. We can adapt to things as they are. We can exit or quit the situation, or we can try to work with others to change it. So understanding collaboration as one option, but not the only option, I think it's obvious, but it's often forgotten and it's important. The second, which we've alluded to before, is this idea that some people are our friends that we can work with, and some people are our enemies that we can never work with. And I think this is a terrible misunderstanding. Sometimes we may have friends, but we don't need to or want to work with them on a particular issue. And people who we don't agree with or like or trust, or even who we believe to be our enemies, are the people we most need to work with, even though we wish it wasn't necessary. So to understand that this isn't a matter of black and white, there's a big gray area of people we might need to work with under certain circumstances. So those are two of the misunderstandings. But I think the most important one, I said I was on a webinar yesterday, a big webinar with several hundred people, and people were posing questions in the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And most of the questions were along the lines of, I have to deal with these people that are selfish or narcissistic or words like that, wrong in some
yes.
way. But the question kept coming up. It must have come up in 5 or 6 different wordings. And I realized these are the most upvoted questions on the Zoom Q&A platform. And what I realize is that this is a very fundamental and common idea, that our common assumption, and maybe even I would say lazy assumption, is the problem is those people. That's the
Mm,
starting point. The problem is
yes.
those people. And I know I do that all the time.
Mm,
Maybe 100% of the time when I'm in a dispute, my first thought is, those people, why do they think this? Why do they want this?
yeah.
Why do they? So it's common, but it's really a terrible starting point, because it may or may not be true, but it's certainly not helpful, because it gets in the way of asking the question, why are they doing what they're doing? What's going on for them? And most importantly, what can I do? Or
Yeah.
how am I part of this story? And what can I do to contribute to changing what's going on? So I was just surprised to over and over get this question, how do I deal with those difficult, troublesome, even evil others? I'm not saying that people are never difficult or troublesome or even sometimes evil, but starting that always, I'm exaggerating to make the point, is a common and terrible error.
I love so many things you're saying, and I'm going to keep on using the word love, 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 because
Yeah.
this is just hitting for me in so many ways. One of the key skills or tools we teach on in change leadership is collaboration. So you can see why I totally loved your book. When I heard about it, I had to go find it and read it. Is because often at times we have to work with a lot of people who are considered in quote resistant to change. And one of the things I always say to my clients, students I'm teaching, is that resistance, in quotes again, is a good thing. It's feedback. And sometimes we have those blind spots, right? Where we
Mm.
think they have the issue. But sometimes if we take a step back and come from a place of resistance is feedback, what am I hearing? What are they saying? What may need to change, as opposed to taking that seat and saying, oh, they're resistant to change. Oh, I need to change them. They're the issue. And even when we talk about communication as a tool, we say, as the change leader, it's your responsibility to ensure that the message is being communicated or received as
Yeah.
intended. Because usually, so I sent this email, oh, I did this and they didn't get it. Okay, but are you taking responsibility to say, how did they receive it? And that's where we go into things like our stakeholder analysis, understanding our audience so that we can more effectively communicate with them. So I just love what you were saying is where we have to be in control of what's within our control, or we have to take
Yeah.
accountability for what's within our control and not always look at it as it's the other person, it's them.
Yes, and I think there's another angle to this. Somebody pointed out, a community leader in Boston pointed out to me decades ago. What's usually the case is not that people are resistant to change, they're resistant to being changed.
Mm,
So, in general, nobody likes being bossed around, especially bossed around to something that doesn't make sense to them or that they think is against their beliefs or interests. And this is a pretty fundamental thing about working with people, whether it's at work or in the community or at home. Nobody likes being subjugated or bossed around or told what to do. Nobody. I think one of the basic problem with change management is I'm going to manage you. When I give talks on this, one of the most common questions I get, whatever subject I'm talking about, is people will say, and you use the following words, they will say, how do you get people to dot, dot, dot? And I've heard this question so many times that I'm always listening for it, because for me, that phrase in English, how do you get people to, you're already on the wrong track.
mm,
Because actually you can almost never get people to do anything. At least I can't. I've not been able to get people to do things, not as the owner of a company, not as a consultant, and not as a neighbor, and not as a father and grandfather or husband for that matter. It just doesn't work. But this idea that we can get people to do things, meaning force people to do things, is very widespread and it shows up in that particular formulation.
that's very interesting. To go back a little bit, even to how we need to look on the inside, when we talk about one of the dimensions around stretching ourselves, there was another quote that stood out for me in your book, and it said, to succeed in collaborating across difference, we must understand collaboration as it really is possible, but not straightforward, human rather than mechanical, offering both opportunities and risks, demanding that we open up to changing ourselves and involving many twists and turns, and so requiring many choices.
Gosh, that's a good sentence. I must have rewritten it 100 times. So I'm happy the way it came out.
I can only imagine that you did it loads and loads of times. Isn't it so rewarding when people just pick it up and say, okay, it's hitting home, it's hitting home?
Rewarding. It is rewarding. And I'm for better or worse, a perfectionist. And one of the things I like about writing is it's one of the few things, at least in my life, that I can do, that I can keep working on until it's as good as it can be. So it's very satisfying. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's bring this home to our audience and even to everybody. When I say our audience, change leaders, change managers, leaders, human resource folks, people responsible for leading and driving change. But today, everybody is responsible for leading and driving change in
Mm.
their own sphere, whether in their lives or in the workplace or as a subject matter expert. How does your approach to collaboration tie into how we lead change, especially in today's complex, uncertain, and even emotionally charged environments in disruptive times? So, for somebody who is a change leader, who is responsible for leading change, how can they use collaboration as a tool?
The most basic point the book is making is that if you're trying to work across difference, and we're always trying to work across difference. People, there's always commonalities and differences in every group of people. To recognize that there's two ways to do that, and they're both important and they're both effective, but they're not the same, and they're required in different contexts. One is if we're in a context, low complexity, low conflict, where we're a team, and I think the team word or metaphor is important, like a sports team, like an orchestra, like a surgical team, where we agree on what needs to be done and we know who has to do what, then that's one situation. And we have to approach that in a certain way. We have to put the team first. We have to have a clear plan. We have to know what everybody's supposed to do. And that's one thing. But in contexts where that doesn't work, high complexity and or high conflict, we need a completely different approach, calling stretch collaboration, where just doubling down on, could we just be like a team? Could we just follow the plan? Could everybody just do what they're supposed to do? Will never work. And doubling down on it doesn't work. And I think that there are more and more circumstances where we need to work together, but we have to take account of the differences and conflicts. We have to feel our way forward, and everybody has to take responsibility for themselves, not for telling other people what to do. So that's the message. I'm just trying to provide a vocabulary and a theory, as you will, if you will, about these two different approaches, both of which are good, but that work in different contexts.
So right now, we on the precipice of where we're thinking there's AI, there's remote work, so many social changes going on. It's stretching our cultures, even in the workplace. It's stretching what we'll consider as a team, because before we're a team, we're doing this together. Now you're bringing AI into the team.
Yeah.
You're bringing AI into the way we do things. There's that fight between back to work and remote work. What does the future right now of collaboration look like when we look at a world which is being shaped by AI, remote work, and so many social changes going on?
Well, I think you know more about the impact of AI on work than I do, but the part of that I do understand or have some insight into is, first of all, we're in a context with lots of things being disrupted, whether it's because of technological changes or political changes or social changes or international trade. Really, just to state the obvious, things are not stable, and lots of things that I just thought is just the way things are. They've always been like this, or they've been like this for a long time. They're going to keep being like this. This is not true. So we're living in a time of disruption, and it's opportunities for some and dangers for others. So that's one thing. But the other part of it, which I think really matters, is this: when you talk about remote work and social change, it seems we're in a period where, yeah, it's easy to disconnect. It's easy to be on the phone. It's easy to not go to work, not be with other people, and with all the rubbing shoulders, literally on the subway or figuratively at work, where we're having to work things out. This sort of what used to be normal life. We're amongst people with lots of differences, whether it's getting to work or at work. And this is just part of being an alive person. Now there are more options to withdraw from that, to let that basic capacity of being with diverse others atrophy. And whether it's in social media or our political lives, to stay just with the people who we're comfortable with and who are like us. So when you couple the disruption with the distancing, that's when I think we're getting into dangerous territory.
Yes, it's easier to just ignore than try to work with, right? Because you can just say,
exactly.
I'm going to my corner. I'm going to ignore
Exactly.
this. We're not in that position. Say, let's make it work. I think back to the regular thing. If something is not working, you say, let's go have a coffee. So you're going to see the person every day. Let's go have a coffee and try and work these things out. Now you're not seeing the person. Let's not do coffee. So still touching on that in some elements, but going a little deeper. We're living in what's, I'm sure you would agree, an increasingly polarized world, politically, socially, and you could even say perhaps within organizations. And we're often faced with people we may not agree with, we may not like, or we may not trust. What can leaders do to foster that culture of collaboration inside an organization, especially when we have so many external societal polarization, which kind of finds its way to sip into the workplace?
Well, I don't think I know the full answer, but the first thing that comes to my mind is to model the kind of openness or appreciation for plurality that is required
Mm,
in these circumstances. If the leader is, by their words and actions, saying, you're either agree with me or you're out, you're on my side or you're my enemy, I'm going to deal with you if you go along with me, and if not, I'm going to freeze you out. This isn't what is required, I
mm.
think, in the time we're living in. In other words, is the leader a polarizing or a pluralizing presence?
Yeah, that drives the culture. You use
Mm,
the word model. You model what you want to see in the organization. And oftentimes, if it's polarized at the top, it just sips through to the
yeah,
organization and this polarization. And there could be many reasons for polarization. There may be many reasons why people choose to disagree. And like you say, it's about working with people you may not agree with, you may not like, or you may not trust. Often the times, some of these disagreements or opposing views are embedded in values and beliefs about
yeah.
certain situations. How does one still try to maintain their sense of integrity or what they hold there as their values while working collaboratively with people whose values or methods they might deeply disagree with? You've seen people on different opposing divides, and you've had to help facilitate
Yeah.
discussions and conversations.
I think there's a basic misunderstanding in all of this, which is that we have to agree in order to be able to live together and work together. I don't know if you know, there's a very famous body of marriage research. The author associated with it is a man named John Gottman, written many books on marriage and based on tens of thousands of hours of clinical observation of married couples. And he has this incredible statistic that 67% of marital disagreements deal with matters that cannot be resolved. They're fundamental personality or cultural differences. And so, what is the recipe for a marriage that lasts versus falls apart? It's the ability to deal with that unresolvable difference, either through ignoring it or finding a workaround, or treating it lightly. So, this idea that if we don't agree on everything, and if you don't share my values, I can't work with you. I think this is a misunderstanding about the world. And so, what I'm really trying to do, one of the things I'm trying to do with these books, and with this book in particular, is to lower the bar, to say that to live together and work together doesn't require us to agree, or at least it doesn't require us to agree before we start. It doesn't require us to trust each other. Maybe trust will be built. Maybe we will come to agree, but maybe we won't. I worked a lot in Colombia, a little bit for a long time, the country of Colombia, including during the 52-year Civil War. And I worked with a man named Juan Manuel Santos, who eventually became president of Colombia and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for making peace with one of the big guerrilla armies, the FARC. And on the day he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, his office put out a statement saying that these workshops that he and I had organized together 20 years before had been a key step on the road to peace. So, of course, I was delighted, immediately
Yes.
retweeted it out. But I didn't understand, why was he saying this? These were workshops literally 2 decades earlier, much bigger things had happened. 5 years of negotiations in Havana, huge military campaigns. He'd been Minister of Defense. And so a few months later, I was in Bogota and I asked him this. So I was doing a public interview. I said, President Santos, why do you keep referring to this project for 1996 called Destiny Colombia? And he had a very interesting answer. The first edition of this book had already been published, so I couldn't put it in, but it's in the second edition. And his answer was, the reason I keep referring to Destino Colombia is that's when I first understood that, contrary to all of my political and cultural upbringing, it is possible to work with people you do not agree with and will never agree with. And I thought, this is interesting. We imagine facilitators, consultants imagine there's a disagreement, but we're going to have a cup of coffee, we're going to have a drink, and we're going to realize, actually, we do agree. Well, maybe we will, but often we're going to find we really don't agree, and we still have to work together. We still have to live together. And so that's what I'm trying to lower the bar to living together and working together. And I think, on the contrary, people keep raising the bar, saying, no, we have to agree. You have to agree on the problem. You have to agree on the values. I have to trust you. Now we're making something difficult. We're making it impossible.
Would you say it may not be about agreeing, it may not be about liking the person, but collaboration could be sometimes just getting on the same page to move things forward?
Well, or sometimes it's, okay, you do this. Let's see what happens. I'll do this. Let's see what happens. Let's do this next step, maybe separately, maybe together, and we'll see where we get to. And then we'll take the next step. And this is another thing I learned in Colombia, that often different people support a given action for different reasons. You may have a completely different reason for thinking we should try this, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on why to do it. So again, this is lowering the bar. And these days, I think the bars are getting higher. Unless you agree with me, unless you have the same values, unless I trust you, unless you use the same words as me, unless you have the same political beliefs as I do, I can't work with you. Well, that's a recipe for smaller and smaller circles of collaboration and more violent conflict.
Talking about books generally, you've written several books. Which would you say is your favorite?
Well, my second book was called Power and Love, A Theory and Practice of Social Change, and it's my favorite in the sense that I think I said something really fundamental in a really simple way. And that fundamental thing is we need both love and power. We can't choose one or the other. Now, I think it's possible to develop that further. And in this new book, I extend that to not only love and power, but also justice. Partly, it comes back to this odd word I used at the beginning of the conversation, an aesthetic judgment. Writing books is partly about trying to do something useful, but it's also partly about trying to do something beautiful and simple. And I'm very happy with the simplicity of that book. And that's something I'm always trying to do.
And it comes through. I can see it in your face. The smile, it's coming through. I love to end on two questions. One of it is about the world we're experiencing today. We've spoken about that, this change, this disruption, this uncertainty. On a personal level, how are you feeling right now about the current state of the world?
Well, I'll answer your question, but in a way I don't place a lot of importance on that as such, because I think how we feel about the state of the world has a lot to do with our personality rather than about the world. I'm generally a worrier. I generally think things are going to go badly. So in that sense, there's lots to worry about these days. Many, many, many things to worry about. And there's lots of grounds for pessimism. But at the same time, I really have no doubt at all about what I'm supposed to be doing and what contribution I need to make. And the contribution I need to make, which relates to writing and talking and working with the ideas we've been talking about this last hour, I think this is something useful to do. And so I don't, what is it? Pessimism of the spirit and optimism, the will. I'm not sure I've got that quote right. I'm gloomy about the world, but clear and happy about what I need to do to contribute to it.
That is so cool. And it comes back to you cannot control the world. You can't control outside circumstances. But one of the things you can do, which you're clearly modeling, is you're focused on what is within your own control and creating certainty between what seems to be an uncertain world. Final question is if we could take away one insight, anybody listening right now could take away one key insight on the book, Collaborating with the Enemy, what would you want that to be?
And that collaborating across difference is not easy or straightforward or guaranteed, but it is possible and it's necessary. So just do it.
Yes, it is. To wrap that up, another of the quotes that you have in the book, you say it offers new, practical, and hopeful options for getting to where we need to be. And I really love the hopeful. It gives us hope of what is possible. And where can folks grab the book from?
The short answer is anywhere you buy books. The audio version and the print version and the ebook version have all just come out, and whether it's your local bookstore or Amazon or any bookstore.
And I'm looking forward to the audio version to be able to listen to it on the treadmill. And hopefully, because I've marked it all already and taken all the points, I'm not going to be pausing the treadmill.
I just have this image of you flying off the treadmill because you lose your attention, so you get zipped
Just
off the
keep on
back.
going.
I wouldn't want to be responsible for an injury.
No, since I've already read the print, the audio would just be helping me listen to it again and taking everything in. Adam, it's been absolutely awesome having a conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being our guest on the Change Leadership Conversations.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Change Leadership Conversations. Be sure to hit the follow button, leave us a review, and share this podcast with your team or fellow change leaders, because leading change is better when we do it together.